Welcome to the Warships Podcast with your host, Kellorn, Venicera, and Arun.
Hello and welcome to episode 123 of the Warships Podcast. I'm your host, Kellorn, and Venicera and Arun are here with me today as we talk in depth about the new Soviet battleship line. Before we get started, I wanted to kind of pull you guys' thoughts about if you have any broad impressions about the new line in general before we talk about individual ships and the quirks of each one.
That's a great question. I was kind of listening to last week's episode, just trying to catch up, and many of the same, general impressions as what you guys had initially talked about, I've been experiencing too. And I would say one of the biggest things is, you go to kind of attack with these ships. And I don't want to say like I'm a super aggressive player, but I do like to be aggressive, and my play style, tends to be that wait until the right moment and then be aggressive and just attack and go for it. And these ships are kind of perfect for that. And just the way that, the meta on the American server or the North American server is just kind of like you get there, you're ready to attack, and then just everyone kind of leaves you, and it's really frustrating right now in the game, the way things are kind of turning out, at least on NA.
Oh man, I love the line. I love the accuracy buff you get. That I think it's closer than 12 kilometers. I love it. I honestly wish that this was not a feature that was unique to Soviet battleships. In fact, I would love it if every battleship had a feature like this, and maybe adjust the curves. Which ones are better or worse at it, because battleships fighting close range is fun. It puts them at risk of destroyers, meaning that destroyers are going to have more fun. It also means that they have to navigate torpedoes better. We also end up in situations where battleships push. What an amazing feature is that? I haven't seen that since Ranked. And, it makes it a lot of fun because battleships are slow. And if they end up in the heat of the battle, they have to make a lot of decisions on how they want to angle and all of those things, which are mostly absent when you are sitting at range. Because, hey, all the enemies are in this one direction my nose is pointed at. So I don't need to care about how I angle, how I turn, etc. because they're all there. And I really love it. I love this feature so much. And going close as a battleship and actually being able to land all of my shells, it's amazing. I love it.
I guess my concern, Arun, is that I think that they might be too accurate at longer ranges still. Like, I feel like that accuracy curve needs to be even steeper than it is right now, because you can still land hits, and you're not going to land a lot of them, but you can still land hits where you want to land them, at 18, 20 kilometers with these ships. That's really the edge of their range. And so I worry that it's too accurate and people are going to be like, I get destroyed when I push because they're vulnerable on their side. So I'm going to sit back and snipe, even if it's the suboptimal way to play them.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But I think the reason for it is that, at least correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it because the Kreml has insane armor penetration values on top of the fact that her shells are really fast, meaning that if they even hit the target at long range, they are more likely to penetrate than almost any other battleship, and also the shells get there much faster. So I do agree that the curves should be adjusted, but it might be because of these two things.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Kreml sometimes you're just like, I took that shot because I didn't have any other shot to take, and then I get two citadels at 19 kilometers. Why would I push? So that's what worries me about them. I do agree. They feel when you get under 15, even under 15, under 12 kilometers, they are deadly. But they're also vulnerable.
Yeah, I had a pretty recent experience where one of my first games in the Kremlin, this Yamato just kind of, came out to play, and I want to say maybe it was like 10 or 11 kilometers, and yeah, there was a devastating strike, and it's like, I don't think you want to tango with this ship, that close.
Although one thing I will mention is that I'm not sure whether it's a good idea that their HE values are what they are. I'm okay with the fact that the AP is this accurate, but HE, I'm questioning it, not because of any other ships, like other battleships or cruisers, but because of DDs. Because when a destroyer gets spotted, they're almost always within that nice sweet spot range where you will land many of your shells, and because of that, it's pretty much a nightmare for DDs. And that's even when you use AP. I can't really imagine what happens when you spam HE instead.
I was actually going to bring that up. Is that I haven't been firing a lot of HE at them because it's the reload times tend to be pretty long on these ships, so switching doesn't often make sense, I've found. But even the AP, like I hit a Khabarovsk with the Kreml with 5 shells at 15 kilometers, and he took 10,000 damage. It was obscene.
Yeah, I agree. It's been just AP all the time, every time. I don't care. Destroyer's not still doing good damage and on everything I shoot.
Speaking of RNG and hitting long range, I think yesterday I managed to hit a DD at like 20 kilometers with the Kreml. It was quite nice. And it wasn't one shell, it was 2.
And yeah, that's what I mean. Is like there is no reason that these ships, with what they're stated to be able to supposed to be for, should be able to do that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think obviously there's going to be some adjusting done with all the feedback and actual stats that we're getting back to wargaming. I do have one question though. From last week, it seemed to be pretty general consensus about the usefulness of the radar. Haven't had another week to play. Have you had any better luck with the radar on these ships? Because I actually have found a couple instances where battleships were, trying to stay dark, and they were at that kind of 12 to 15 kilometers, and I'm like, and turn that radar on and keep firing at them.
I will say it's really been useful against ships like Conqueror and a lot of the Royal Navy battleships, but there's just not enough battleships in the game that have the kind of stealth that you would need to really need this radar to make it all of that useful in the majority of games. I've taken it on all my ships so far, every game, but I have used it only a handful of times. Usually it's less than once per game, and every time I look at the modules, I'm like, should I just switch this and go back to the plane?
So one thing where the radar is supposedly really, really good at is when you are in a cyclone. And I think if it's that useful in a cyclone, it's too good and probably shouldn't be like that. On the other hand, I have played around 30 games and I have not run into a situation where I have been able to use my radar in a cyclone because, well, mostly I look at it and go, well, in most games I don't get to use this radar for much effect, so I'm going to pick a plane because the plane is just better. And the few times I have had
what I really want is a spotter plane. I really want a spotter plane on some of these ships because when you're in a tier 9-10 battle and you've got 19 kilometers range, there's a couple of times, particularly at the beginning of the game, where you're like, I wish I could take this shot right now.
True. I'm just not sure how much use there would be from that.
Well,
I also find it useful to shoot over islands is the other thing I use that plane for a lot. And I've missed it many times. Sorry, Vanessa.
Yeah, I think maybe Wargaming fears that it might promote a more campier, shooting from afar. And that's something that they want to avoid with these ships. So,
all right, well, let's get talking about these ships in depth. So we have not gotten to test the tier 3 or the tier 4 yet. That we believe is going to be sometime soon. We don't know yet. So we'll be starting out with the tier 5, which is Pyotr Veliky, which is named after Tsar Peter the Great. And if I mangle any of those names and you know them better, Aaron, please tell me. This ship was a joint design concept between the Putilov and the German shipbuilder Blom and Voss, known as the number 707 battlecruiser project. With 8 14-inch guns and 4 double turrets and a decent turn of speeds at 28 knots, Pyotr feels very much like a slightly slower Soviet version of the Congo class. And I actually find her to be one of the prettier ships of the line in kind of an old dreadnought way. She also feels very comfortable to play at her tier with good speed, good guns, but with her only real major downside being the limited 16.7 kilometer range. I guess, is this ship too much like Congo for you guys? Or because that was what I kept feeling every time I played her.
Yeah, I kind of got the same vibe, the same feel. It's a good ship. I've been really enjoying playing it. Um, it I don't know. It really kind of fits my aggressive style, and where Congo is just an all around good battleship. It's definitely got the range, and you can definitely kind of sit back and use that Japanese accuracy to snipe some really impressive shots when it does happen. Pitcher, not so much, but it's, I don't know. I haven't really looked at the armor values, but every time I've just kind of gone in, like I take all the hits and, don't take any, massive damage or anything. And I just kind of sail in and sink people and yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Arun, what about you?
It's one of the most bullshit tier 5 battleships, or any low tier battleship I have ever played. It's so in. The armor on that ship is ridiculous. Sure, okay. I think you can still be citadeled, which is fine. But if you look at.
You can by tier 7s.
Yeah.
Like, I had all kinds of problems with the tier 7s, but the tier 4s, tier 5s, tier 6s, forget it. It's basically invulnerable.
But the worst part is that the armor scheme isn't really. Even if you can be citadel, this is an armor scheme. I would take a tier 10, literally millimeter for millimeter, because the deck armor on the ship, almost everywhere, is 38 millimeters, like even in the middle, which means that, hey, you can't even penetrate this. This is what Montana has, basically, in the middle. And the worst part is that this stuff is on the bow as well, like on top of the bow, because it gets even crazier on the side. The fore armor plate on this ship is 75 millimeters, and the one that is on the waterline is 125, and it gets to the very tip of the bow. And then there's some kind of 180 millimeter plate, and there's 250 main belt. The only normal type of armor the ship has is at the very aft. There's this tiny piece of the ship that has the normal 19 millimeters of penetration, and because of this, I don't think she felt anything like the Congo, because you could just do some really crazy stuff. If you point your bow towards enemy battleships, it doesn't matter what battleships they are. They will not overmatch your bow. You could literally face a Yamato and they could not do it. That in my opinion, is crazy. And of course, what sets her apart from the Congo is also the fact that she has 16.7 kilometers range instead of the 20 the Congo has, but she also gets she does get the Soviet accuracy thing, right? That's how it felt to me, but
yes, yeah, she absolutely does. When you get close with her, she will wreck anything in her tier group.
Yeah,
just wreck it.
Yeah, that's what I felt too. Like the ship feels really powerful, like really, really, really powerful.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't looked into the armor. I looked into the armor scheme of some of the higher tier ships quite a bit more thoroughly than I did the tier 5. But if that's really how she is armored, then that's absurd. It needs some kind of adjustment, some kind of nerf. I guess what along those lines, Arun, what would you do to what do you think is a sensible armor scheme for that tier to put in this ship?
Honestly, well, I think the armor scheme isn't actually too bad for that tier, precisely because there are other ships with really bullshit armor schemes at the same tier, like the German tier 5 one. I think what would make more sense is either to bring the other tier 5 battleships, like the Congo, to a similar standard, or then to make the armor scheme of ships like this more standard, where you give them the 19 millimeters of bow and 19 millimeters of proper aft. I'm fine with the 38 millimeters of deck armor, because that seems to be very common in the low tiers. For example, the Fuso is known to be powerful because of that as well. But that makes them really, really resistant to HE, which you don't get at higher tiers, which is funny to me.
I agree. I mean, it definitely feels like that. Fire was not a problem in several of these low tier ships for me. Vanessa, we were just talking about this. What do you think about where would you go with this ship in terms of adjustments?
God, I wouldn't even know where to start. I feel they are very strong. They're very, they're going to have to be toned down and scaled back in some manner. And, I don't know, because, one of the goals that they want to do is to have a ship that can go in there aggressively. And I don't know if you necessarily want to, steal the thunder from the German battleships and what they do, but you're trying to make something similar. And, it, honestly, I don't know, because the games that I play, like I literally go in, and the frustrating games that I had is when like no one would support me or go in with me. And I'm like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And like, what are you all doing? You're just like hanging back there. And like, I just need you to like, come with me and support me, and we'll win easily. And maybe, I don't know, maybe raise the Citadel, or do some adjustments internally, because I literally went like 1v3 battleships and just didn't have a problem, just sailed by one, sailed by another, just doing damage, sinking cruisers and doing serious damage to them. And it was like, wow, this is interesting and a lot of fun, but it is OP.
Well, I mean, there is one downside at those tiers, which are DDs with their torpedo reload that is equivalent to your main battery reload, so you have to take that into account. I think that maybe it would be a good idea to do like a general rebalance of the lower tier ships, especially the battleship ones. Maybe extend the secondary stuff to lower tiers now, because, the higher tier ships just play that much differently, and I think it would be a lot of fun to have like a secondary build at tier 6 instead of tier 7, perhaps even something at tier 5. And I think, well, the Germans could fill that role. And I mean, the reason why the Friedrich der Grosse is decent compared to the Kreml at the high tiers is because they work quite kind of differently. The Grosse Kurfürst, she has secondaries. The Kreml doesn't. And you could extend the same thing down to the lower tiers.
Well, that was actually one of the things I wanted to bring up, is that these, you're supposed to be pushing in these ships, but they have no meaningful secondaries at any tier. And it feels a little weird, honestly, like that you don't have that secondary fire that's doing that anything like effective. And so if you're going to have a ships that push, I kind of feel like, I understand that the secondaries are the German thing, but like, it just feels weird not to have your secondaries going off when you're pushing.
I felt the exact same thing, and everyone's going to bring that up, and I'm glad you kind of agree as well, or at least think of that. And I remember looking at the concepts of a lot of these ships a long time ago and their drawings, and I'm like, oh, I bet the secondaries are going to be probably pretty awesome on this. And no, we haven't seen that. So I don't know what Wargaming is necessarily thinking or leaning towards with this. With, you want an aggressive ship, but you don't really have anything going in the way of secondaries.
I mean, Arun, would you find secondaries on these ships that were at least marginally effective? I'm not talking about like 11-kilometer secondaries like the German ones, but maybe like if they're fully buffed, like 9-kilometer or kilometer secondaries. Something like that?
Well, when I mentioned the secondary stuff, I meant like other battleships. I don't think the Soviet battleships need it. I think the main battery accuracy is good enough. I don't think the secondary stuff is that important, because if you start adding secondaries to them, you have to take something else away from them. Otherwise, they're just way too powerful.
I understand. I guess one of the things I ran into quite a few times with these ships, and we do need to move on to the next ship here, but is they are inordinately vulnerable to torpedo attacks, and not even just direct torpedo damage, but when you respond to a torpedo attack and you turn into it and you give any kind of broadside to enemy ships, it is punished heavily. So you have this, you're supposed to be pushing, you're supposed to be moving up, but destroyers can completely ruin you. And so it feels very disincentivized in that way. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that makes it more interesting. It means that you need your teammates to do something. And I have to echo what Vanessa said earlier. I was in a few situations where I internally screamed to my team, do something. anything.
Oh, that was a constant refrain in my head, like while I was playing these ships, and it was honestly a really weird balance of having a good time in them and screaming in frustration, and I could never really make up my mind one way or the other which was the more prominent feeling. But that said, at Tier 6, we have the Izmail class battlecruisers, which were an evolution of the same design principles that gave us Gangut, Imperator Nikolai, the Imperator Marista classes of battleships. The Izmail classes were actually laid down, but never completed when the revolution in 1917 put all shipbuilding to a halt. They have 12 14-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, but 3 of their 4 turrets face aft, giving her a pretty amazing kiting potential with a heavy broadside throw weight that rivals Fuso, but again with the limited 17-kilometer-ish range. This is a lot of people, this is the type of battleships that we saw in the Russian kind of battleship construction era, and you'll probably see something like Gangut is the Tier 4, which has a similar setup with smaller guns, and we have had Imperator Nikolai and Oktoberskaya Revoluция in the game already that have these triple turrets. This one's just a little different with 3 of them facing aft. My biggest problem with this ship was just she does have a decent speed, but getting her to the point where she is kiting is really, really dangerous.
Yeah, and I don't know if you'd necessarily want to kite, because again, just if you're having to kite, you're probably taking, a lot of fire from, probably cruisers, and it's not like you'd necessarily have the range. And something that we haven't really talked about yet is, again, you have a limited amount of damage control parties. And so you have to be really kind of cognizant of how you're going to fight in this ship, because if you take a lot of damage, yeah, you can kind of mitigate that for a very short time and kind of, it's back up off cooldown and you can do it again if you need it. But if you're in that much action and that much fire and fury coming at you, you're still not going to last long, because you just can't repeatedly damage control party. And if you're trying to be there for the team and do what you need to do, and maybe the team's not going with you, that means you're going to have to try and survive to the end of the match, to do whatever you can to try to win. And you might not be able to do that because you're going to run out of DCPs, which I have a couple times. Even trying to space out everything and having superintendent and premium. It's actually happened a couple matches.
I have been fairly conservative with my DCPs, and I haven't run out of them. Although I might have used all of them, except I wouldn't have been able to use a further one anyway. On the other hand, though, I do feel that I don't use it quite enough, because mostly it's a single fire and I don't want to put it out with the DCP like this. But sometimes it does feel like I should. Although, thinking about this could encourage ships to go closer if everybody had a DCP like this, because they would be less likely to sit far away. And if you sit far away and there's a fire set on you, but you know that there's like no ships that could potentially torpedo you, you can easily just DCP on any battleship, because the chance that they will set 2 fires in after that within any meaningful time is generally quite low. But I just noticed that when I played Izmail, apparently I played her stock, which is
I did that too on the first game, and I did it to Pyotr too, the first game I played in that, and I was like, this feels weird.
Anyway, the ship's armor actually isn't as good as the Pyotr Veliky's. The Pyotr Veliky's armor is much better, but this one's still fairly decent. The bow on the ship is, though, massive. Like, it's not quite massive. It's pretty big. There are bigger bows that we'll talk about later. And I do want to mention one thing when I played the Izmail.
Now, are you talking about shape or girth?
We'll see it later. With Izmail, I played the game. I actually witnessed a solo warrior on the enemy team by a ranger that ended up being, I think, second or third last from the enemy team. It was quite impressive, but it had nothing to do with the ship. I just thought that was cool.
I guess for both of you, we've established that the Tier 5 is blatantly overpowered for her tier. Do you feel the same way about the Tier 6?
Not really. At least I don't this one isn't resistant to the HE in the same way the Tier 5 one is, which means that cruisers spamming HE against you, especially heavy cruisers, are going to be a difficult task for you. And I think because of that, it's not as big of a problem. On the other hand, the 12 guns is quite amazing, particularly because, well, this is still a somewhat low-tier ship, and because she still gets the accuracy bonus, you end up in fights that are closer range than you do at higher tiers, meaning that your guns seem perhaps even more effective for its tier than you get at the higher tiers. And so you seem to have more firepower, but you aren't quite as tanky as you are at tier 5. And as far as the tier 6 ship goes, she seems to be pretty average survivability-wise.
Do you agree with that, Vanessa?
I can never
Also,
agree.
tier 6 has Fuso, so, she can't match up to her.
She's got a very similar broadside throw weight in terms of damage potential, and you two tend to get the better shots in this than you do in Fuso, because Fuso tends to stay so far back,
Yeah, but none of that matters when the Fuso is 3 kilometers outside of your range and still pestering you with HE.
There is that. Well, Tier 7 brings us to Sinop, which is an attempt at a post-Jutland battleship designed by VP Kostanenko for the Black Seas fleet. With 9 16-inch guns in an ABX superfiring arrangement, Sinop is an extremely comfortable ship to play at Tier 7 that I found. While her range at 17.8 kilometers continues to be an issue, the high speed of 30.8 knots makes her able to position and bully many of the slower ships in her matchmaking spread. And one of the things that's interesting is that the gun arrangement on this ship is kind of unique for Tier 7. It's the only one that we have that's triple turrets, that's ABX like this, which is a feature of some of the higher tier battleships and is often very comfortable for people to play with. Do you find Sinop to be... I found her to be borderline overpowered at Tier 7 with the 16-inch guns, the ABX, and her bow armor, and the 30.8 knots of speed.
Also, don't forget that she has some of the tiniest superstructures we have in the game.
I was gonna say, when I spawned into a match, and you know how the camera kind of situates you when you first load into a match, and it's like, wow, this is a skinny battleship compared to, the others in the line, and was just kind of amazed. Also, the turret angles on it are interesting, to say the least. I did forget to just kind of quickly mention about the Tier 5 is the turret angles on that ship are ridiculous. I think that's something that really kind of adds to its OP-ness.
But they're really actually Congo has the same damn turret angles as that Tier 5 does.
Yeah, but does it have the armor?
No, but I'm just saying, like, from just the turret angles, it's not out of the realm of possibility at that tier.
Anyway, back to the sign up. It's a good ship. I mean, it's as you get up in the tiers, like this one, and what's interesting is, like, 7's a fun tier for me to play. It's one that I like probably more than a lot of other tiers, and I like the ship, and I had some good, like, personal results, but I didn't have good matches in it. It was just kind of funny how, go figure, like, a ship that I should be having, a really stupid good time in, and yeah, I'm enjoying testing it, but the matches were just horrible.
Oh, the one thing, and I'm curious if either you guys agree, is in Sinop, I can see Tier 8 battleships. I can see 2 Tier 8 battleships coming at me, and I'm like, I can take that. And then I step back, I'm like, wait a minute, that seems a little bit ridiculous.
Well, but I mean, I kind of do that with Scharnhorst, so, I mean, is it really any... And I used to do that with Nagato, but not so much anymore.
Everyone, where are you at on the power scale for Sinop? I mean, because it's just, for me, I was like, man, the more I play this, the more it's just like, it was really realistically the high point in the line before the Tier 8 and the 9 really were a dip for me.
I've played a few games in her, but I think I would need to play more of her, because I think I didn't have quite as much success with her as the stats of the ship suggest, because The ship has very good armor indeed. She can definitely, especially if you go bow on against battleships, she's a monster because her guns are great. Like, this is something I think, yeah, you would expect on a tier 8 ship, not tier 7 one. And combine that with the great protection at the front, or even the aft, she can be really, really scary to the enemy battleships, which I think is kind of cool. Also, speaking of secondaries, the ship actually has a lot of secondaries, they just don't have range.
Yeah, they suck real bad. Alrighty, well, that does bring us to the two battleships at Tier 8, one researchable and one premium. The researchable ship, Vladivostok, appears to be a mashup of the Project 21 and Project 23 battleship projects. Again, she has 9 16-inch guns and an ABX super firing arrangement. Vladivostok feels like a similar playstyle to Sinop with better armor on the sides, but a problem with her bow armor. But she does have a slightly lower top speed of 29 knots. Her waterline bow is 32 millimeters, which is typical for a tier 8. But this compares to the 125 to 113 millimeter plate that's on Sinop's bow that makes tier 7 so nasty when it's bow on. Again, with the 33-second reload, Vladivostok, it really felt like a low point for me in the line. I felt like I would rather play Sinop at tier 8 and Vladivostok at tier 7.
That's interesting, because I actually had some halfway decent games in Vladivostok. And I will say, out of all the ships, I think Vladivostok's probably the best looking one, in my opinion. Like, just aesthetically looking at the ship, that one was definitely, wow, this ship looks really good. Lenin is, I don't know, I'm not a huge fan of the Nelson, Izmail style ships like that, but I did have some okay success in it, and I could see people liking Lenin. But yeah, I do get what you're saying, Kalorna, with the way that things have kind of been going. Setup definitely could feel okay at tier 8. But I had some good games with Vladivostok at tier 8, even against some tier 10. So I didn't feel like it was that bad, but maybe I need to get some more games in, those tiers, and just kind of really, feel and kind of flesh out those ships a little bit more.
I don't know. I think the Vladivostok really is in the wrong ship class, though. Pretty sure she's supposed to be an aircraft carrier. What's with the bow you could probably land a plane on and all that? She has the biggest bow of any ship I have ever seen, I think. This even makes Exeter look like a child in comparison. Like, this bow is so big. Like, it doesn't have the same armor scheme that Sinop has, or even the Lenin or the Izmail or the Pyotr Veliky. But I think the bow is so damn long that even if you overmatch the front section of it, I'm not sure if it can reach the citadel. Like, it's so long. What the hell?
I guess I just feel like I took a lot more damage just sailing around and getting random pot shots at me in Vladivostok than I ever did in Sinop.
Yeah, especially HE, because the bow is so insanely big. Although this ship also in the middle has the nice 40 millimeters of armor on the plate, the middle deck plate, so that you don't get HE spammed to death. But the big broadside citadel that can be hit, especially at tier 8, since you can end up often in matches with like Musashis and Yamatos and all those nice things, they can really hurt your side citadel plate. And I think that's a nice thing about these Soviet BBs, because you can actually citadel them, which is something, we don't have enough of in World Warships. I mean, yes, Montana, for example, can be citadeled from the side, but the citadel armor sits so low on the water that RNG is the one that decides whether you can get the citadel or not. If your shells are slightly too high, no dice. But on the Soviet battleships, that's not the case. If they show side and you are even a reasonably good shot, there's a good chance you're going to get the citadel. And Vladivostok is definitely of that style, where if you show side, you're going to get punished. And I honestly think this is not a bad thing. But it does feel kind of out of place in the line, though, especially compared to the earlier tier battleships.
Well, that's what but I mean, in its defense, Vladivostok feels very much like the tier 9 and the tier 10. If you show sides in any of those ships, you are in for a real paddling, as Mr. Jingles would have to say. So I do feel like she sets you up well for the next ships, but it's like it's this discrepancy in power where you go from tier 7 to tier 8 and you're expecting the ship to be better, and I just didn't feel like it was.
Yeah, it definitely feels like kind of the transition between, the US battleships from tier 6 or from tier 7 on up into the later tiers is just such a vastly different shift in design and gameplay, and you kind of get that going there as well. And it again kind of led to a lot of frustration when playing some of these ships, because it's like, I need you to support me and I've got to sail in, but then no one supported. So it's like I either reverse, bow on, and die a painful death, or I try and get out of here and get with the rest of the team and do a run in, retreating gunning battle. But in the process of doing that, just get murdered because you cannot, show broadside.
I think that's fine, though. Did we speak about the Lenin, or is that next?
We're about
Okay.
to. We're literally about to. So the other tier 8, Lenin, is the Project 21 class herself. She's essentially a Soviet version of the Royal Navy's Nelson class. Lenin sports 9 16-inch guns, all forward of the superstructure and all facing forward. With a 360-degree number 2 turret and a 100-millimeter waterline plate that goes all the way to the bow, Nelson players will salivate and envy at the ability of Lenin to tank bow-on shots. That said, without a super heel and with an extremely exposed citadel, Lenin is very vulnerable to flanking.
Pretty much. I mean, I think you just said it right there. You can't be flanked in these ships. So you have to really think about how you're going to attack and how you're going to situate yourself at the start of the battle. And, anyone who can, sit there and outmaneuver you, you're not going to have a fun game.
Well, on the other hand, it should be fairly difficult to outmaneuver Lenin unless you yourself sail into a bad position, because, well, it is a Nelson class, meaning that you have triple turrets at the front, and the second turret actually does a 360, which is cool. Really, really cool. I think that was mentioned last time. The guns feel really nice because of it. You can sail towards the target and you can swivel and all those nice things while firing at the target. Yes, if you show sign, you are very vulnerable, but I think that's just a fine downside. I found the Lenin to be quite fun to play. I can't really put a finger on why she would feel terrible to me. She just doesn't. She feels good, and I found her fun to play. Although I suppose if I get more into matches against Montanas, I will be sad.
I mean, I liked Lenin. Don't get me wrong. I think I will play Lenin way before I'll play Nelson. The bow armor on Nelson is just atrocious, and it makes her really difficult to play, in my opinion. Whereas Lenin, I mean, if you can set up right and you can get in a channel where all they can see is your bow, you can put some real pounding on people. But the problem is, again, is if your team abandons you, you're screwed.
That's what the report plays poorly is for, right?
But I run out of those every day. I'm kidding.
Yeah, there isn't enough of them in your arsenal to give out to all the people who just, yeah.
I guess since Lenin is going to be a premium, you're going to pay for her. Would you recommend people or recommend this ship to people? Because I think that I kind of would.
Yeah, if you intend on playing Soviet battleships, then yes, I would recommend this ship because it is comfortable enough to play, and it's going to. I don't want to say premiums to teach you the line. You should be kind of going through the line and learning that, but this ship is similar enough to the other high tier ships that if you're using this as a trainer and using this as something to get comfortable with the high tier battleships, the Russian battleships in similarity and style, then I think one, it's going to offer you a slightly unique gameplay with all your turrets in front, but it's still all the concepts, all the things that you would be doing in the other battleships are analogous to this ship. So I think I would recommend this.
I generally don't recommend premiums, so I'm not sure if I would recommend this one. I definitely had fun to play in her, or had fun playing her, and I think she's a very strong ship. She is resistant to HE, which is something you don't get too much at tier 8, so she would probably feel one of the more fun of the Soviet battleships to play, unless you get tier 10, in which case all bets are off.
I mean, I think that's true of almost all the tier 8s, though, isn't it?
Well, not Asashio.
Yeah, at least what, 2/3 of the time you're going to be seeing tier 10s, it feels like.
Well, all right, let me revise that since you said Asashio. That's pretty much true of all the tier 8 premium battleships,
Most
right?
definitely. I can't think of a single one where you would want to be in a tier 10 battle, or wouldn't mind being in a tier 10 battle.
Which brings us to the tier 9 Sovetsky Soyuz, which literally means Soviet Union, which was the Project 23 class battleship design. While 4 of these ships were laid down in the 1930s, none of them were ever completed. With the familiar 9 16-inch guns in an ABX superfiring arrangement, Sovetsky Soyuz feels much like a follow-on to Vladivostok. With her partial bow plating, while her partial bow plating is 220 millimeters, it does not extend all the way to the prow of the ship. And while she does get access to the tier 9-10 upgrades to lower her reload speed to 29 seconds, Sovetsky Soyuz feels like a poorer version of Iowa with a more exposed citadel to me.
Yep.
I honestly felt like either she is the worst of the Soviet battleships, or the Izmail is. One or the other. I think...
Oh, no. Like, it's either Vladivostok or Soyuz for me. Like, Izmail is way ahead of these two.
I guess Vladivostok too definitely feels one of the low points of the line, but I found her to still be fine. Like, we're not talking like Iowa tier here, because let's be honest, the getting close with those guns still feels fun, because you can still land all of your shells when you need it at close range, and this puts her apart from all of the other bad to play tier 9s, because they mostly rely on RNG to be good. Izumo is supposed to be accurate, and that's why she's good. But then again, you're still dealing with lots of RNG. In this case, when you get close, RNG goes, okay, see you guys. You have it. You're gonna hit whenever you fire at a target.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess my biggest thing, with these last 3 tiers of ships is really just the gameplay going in with those ships. And it's not just the ships, but it's everyone else either supporting or not supporting you. And with, at least on the NA server, with so much of everyone is just kind of balling up or not being aggressive, or you sit there and you start to bow in, you start to set up where you're fighting, and you're getting closer, getting ready to make that aggressive push, and oh no, everyone just kind of like, no, I don't really want to do this, and just runs away. I mean, it's just, I'll keep putting in more games, and I understand and I like the concept of these ships, but it really comes down to the mentality of the overall teams, because there's so many times that I've gotten into a great position and then just left. Everyone just left, and like I don't know what else to do but just scream in fury and log off.
Well, clearly your team baited you too well, and you just fell hook, line, and sinker to it. I mean, that's kind of what people in random battles want, though, right? They want somebody else to tank for them, while they are safely at the back firing at the targets, and that's what they love. If they go close with you, they risk their own ship. Maybe you do what they do to you, so there's that problem. But I understand what you're saying. My question to you guys...
This is a little different than that. This is, you start the match, and everyone on your side of the map, you start to move towards the objective, and then after a good, almost 10 minutes worth of playing and fighting, they just leave. It's like, I have been tanking, you should have been able to get into a position here. It's like this ship can do that very well, especially bow on. You're not going to expect, and I do agree what you said or what was brought up last week. This definitely screams of, fire prevention and, utilizing I don't want to necessarily say a zombie build, but you definitely go for a survival build in these ships, and then you go in and you just go to town. But so many times, like, you're doing that, you're returning fire, you're sitting there, you're waiting for that opportunity, and then it's just no, everyone just leaves.
Well, ranked this season was more fun because ships seem to end up being closer due to arms race. Do you think
You were literally taking the words out of my mouth.
Do you
man.
think
I
the
was
ship
gonna ask
would
both of
be
you.
good in arms race then? And would you play her in a ranked battle or in a ranked season if you could? Or would you have played her?
So the key matchup for me is this ship effective against Musashi? And I think the answer is yes, with a qualification. I think that the guns on Soyuz are good enough to take that cheek shot that is so famous against the Yamatos and the Musashis, and if you can get to that 10-12 kilometer range, then you're taking that cheek shot, you're going to get 2, 3, maybe 4 citadels from your salvo, and that's going to devastate any Musashis that you see. My problem is that I really wonder if Kronstadt can citadel her from the side. So you have these if you have people that are flanking intelligently, even in cruisers, you are very vulnerable.
What about you, Vanessa? Would you have played her in the last ranked season?
Well, I generally don't play battleships in ranked. But yeah, I could consider it with the arms race. And that's kind of going back to your initial question is arms race being something that kind of changes everything up. I just think maybe it's on the North American server, but just the meta right now with standard battle and with the domination is just so stale right now. And I don't know what it is, but like I just feel like those matches are just so crappy. Like we need something to stir it up, get people fighting and away from this mentality that's been plaguing these game modes.
Well, I think the problem is mostly in the death ball, but I would have played her in the ranked season most definitely. But not because of these things. I would have played her because she's a Soviet battleship, and the Soviet battleships get that amazing accuracy, which would have been amazing against DDs. DD shows up, I'm going to put 5 shells in her. And that would have probably enraged quite many of the destroyer players. And destroyer players were incredibly popular on the EU server in ranked. So that would have been really useful, I think.
I guess I didn't think about it from the destroyer perspective. It would have been devastating to destroyers. I agree. But we do have one more to talk about. That's the apex of the line, Kreml, meaning Kremlin, was a post-World War II 1950s era battleship design. Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, was notorious for putting faith in large gun-based ships in the post-World War II era, while other shipbuilders and other navies were focusing on missile ships. This eventually gave rise to the Sverdlov class, which the NATO navies were so concerned about, and was one of the reasons why the Iowa-class battleships were reactivated in the 1980s. With 9 18-inch 457mm guns in an ABX superfiring arrangements, Kreml has a devastatingly powerful alpha strike with individual shells doing 15,500 damage citadel hits. With a high velocity, penetration on the guns is high, though she remains unable to overmatch 32mm of armor, falling short of the 460mm guns on Yamato and Musashi. With a 150mm plate of bow armor that tapers to 50mm at the prow, it's unlikely that Kreml can be overmatched in most cases when bow on, even by Yamato herself. But with an even more exposed citadel than her Japanese cousin, Kreml is not really a ship, again, that is just like these other ships that we talked about that you want to expose your broadside in. That said, I find her to be borderline overpowered at tier 10 right now and wonder how they're going to scale her back a bit.
Oh man, her broadside. I sailed next to a Des Moines once, an enemy Des Moines. think she was like 2 or 3 kilometers away, and it was like, who cares about showing broadside to Des Moines? I mean, I've done it plenty in a Yamato. At best, they can get like 1 or 2 citadels. And then I promptly ate 30k damage very, very rapidly, and found out that no, the Kreml's armor, when showing broadside like that, is not quite as good as the Yamato's. And it did teach me a few things. Kill the cruiser that's literally next to you, which is fairly easy to do on a ship like this, because you can overmatch all of the cruiser armors that many of the battleships struggle with. You see, at tier 10, many cruisers have 30 millimeters of armor, and you cannot overmatch that with, for example, Montana. Like, they have these 30 millimeter plates. Yeah.
Alaska?
Yeah, exactly. And this is why, for example, the Yamato and the Republic were really played for a while. I think it was in a clan battle season. Like, that's why they were really popular, because they could actually punish the cruisers. And the Kreml also falls into
Punish
the same...
the bow-on cruisers, which is important.
And the Kreml also fits into that same category. She can do the same thing, except she's also super accurate. And, oh man, I have had some Yamatos do some silly things in front of me. Like a Yamato just doing like a bow-on turn at like 10 kilometers from me. And then she gets hit for 60,000 damage or something obscene like that. I've even had salvos where I did like 30 or 40,000 damage with AP on a battleship without getting a single citadel. It's that crazy. Like, a ship that's like 5 to, let's say, 8 kilometers away, you can reliably put all 12 shells into it. You can't really do that. Or, sorry, yeah, 9. You can't really do that on other battleships. Like, usually 1 or 2 will almost always miss, but not on this ship. It's ridiculously powerful. But she suffers from the flanking problem, like mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I pretty much have to echo that. It's the guns feel really, really good. Even at, max range, you'd still go ahead and fire. I mean, yeah, you're probably not going to hit, with maybe more than one shell, but why not? I mean, I got some pretty long range citadels, and those shells are flying so quickly, and they get, to their destination so quickly that, it feels comfortable shooting those guns. And you get in close, and it's just like, oh, well, rip, and reload, and then rip, and then it's so silly. It just, Yamatos, like, if they make a mistake, like, you literally delete them. At least everyone that I've kind of come across that came out and, wasn't bow on. It's like, oh, yeah, mistakes were made on your part.
I would love to see what Kreml versus Kreml is going to be like, though. Like, I'm thinking
if it's bow on, it's nothing. Yeah. Like, you're just going to bounce.
I'm thinking that the one that
it's like
shows
a Nerf fight.
I think the one that shows broadside first is going to regret it really hard.
And I think that's where it comes in. Like, these are team play ships. Like, I found out very quickly that I could not just drive around in a Kreml and win. Like, and to some extent, I can drive around in my Yamato and quote unquote win, because I know how that ship works, and there are specific things that let you kind of bully people. Kreml was not able to do the same thing. And I did find that Kreml was particularly vulnerable to being burned alive. And I'm not sure why, because her armor plates kind of suggest that she shouldn't be. You know what I mean, Arun?
Yeah, but I think it's because she is guaranteed to have tier 10 opponents, and tier 10 opponents sometimes have a lot more firepower than all of the lower tier stuff. I mean, you have things like Harugumas and the Des Moines and Worcesters. So, and you have the Midway as well, and many of the other CVs that also love setting fires on you.
Speaking of Worcesters, I got 3 citadels with the Sovetsky Soyuz on a Worcester to kill it. And like, in that same battle, somebody was like, citadels on Worcester are black magic, and then I got 3 of them. I was like, oh man, that's brutal.
Russian bias, okay? Russian bias.
But, I mean, I do think that, like, so the funny thing is that we got Kreml, like, literally as the day that they released Alaska to the masses. So I would go into some of these battles, and there'd be 4 Alaskas on the enemy team, and they would drive at me bow on, and the Kreml just laughs and punches right through their bow.
I find that particularly nice because often what you end up having to deal with on the other battleships is that you get into this like 10, 12 kilometer range and you fire on a bow-on cruiser, but the cruiser is so narrow that you'll have only like one shell actually hit the ship, or maybe two. But with the Kreml,
Yeah, that's not a problem. Did you guys have any closing thoughts on these Soviet battleships before we get on to the listener questions of the week?
they're probably one of the more fun ship lines I have played. I don't know. I just like the fact that you get rewarded for going close, and you have very good accuracy at close range. It makes them so much more fun to play and much less frustrating.
Vanessa, you did say that you wanted to talk about the Tier 6 version of the Giulio Cesare for a minute, correct? I forgot that to add that to the list.
Yes, I know it's not a Russian battleship, but I did play a couple games in it, and I just wanted to briefly touch on it because I know a lot of people are really concerned about this ship being up-tiered. The games that I played in it, I had some really outstanding games, including there was a game where this person there was 3 carriers per side, 6 carriers total in the match, and everyone was just kind of going off screaming bloody murder about the thing, and everyone's like, oh, you gotta ball up and share AA, and the son is like, whatever. And just sailed off in this ship. And yeah, we won. And there was a poor Grosh Bay that thought it could go broadside to this thing, and 4 citadels later it was deleted. It's I know people are concerned, but the ship feels good. Yeah, it's gonna suck seeing tier 8s. You're probably gonna see tier 8s often enough, but it still feels okay. It wasn't OP. It wasn't, we talked about Kreml, and Arun, you were talking about how accurate the shells were. Do you remember testing the original Giulio Cesare? Because those shells didn't miss, and the amount of deletage at tier 4 and tier 5 was just downright silly in that ship, and it's not as bad as it was now at tier 6, but it's still comfortable enough. Maybe they need to extend the maximum firing range on it, because I do feel that it is a bit short, but the ship still turns really great. You can dodge, torpedo beat like a boss. Enemy carriers attacking you, you can still kind of dodge and weave, and it's still a good handling ship.
I played a few games with her too, but honestly, I'm not too familiar with the old Giulio Cesare. I just don't remember playing her almost at all, even though I do remember being around when she was tested, but I find her to be fine. She didn't feel particularly strong, but she didn't feel particularly weak at tier 6. I just had decent-ish games. Although, if I look at the stats of the ship, I do have some questions about how well it'll end up performing, but I think the sky is not quite falling, so perhaps it's not too bad.
I guess I have concerns about not about the ship performing at tier 6, because I think that the Cesare would perform just fine at tier 6. My concerns are that the Cesare tended to struggle against tier 7s, and when you start to face tier 8s in Cesare, it's a real bear. I mean, what tier 8s will do to Cesare is not good. Now, again, to some extent, that's true of all of the tier 6 battleships, but still, they rebalanced Cesare to be tier 5 in terms of her armor scheme, and I feel like they need to revert some of that if they want to bring her up to tier 6. I don't think that it's enough to just change her tier from tier 5 to tier 6 and not do anything to her.
Maybe that's the case. Her guns definitely aren't going to do her too many favors at tier 8. I mean, oh boy, at tier 8 you run into ships like the Baltimores, whom even ships like Tirpitz cannot overmatch. So Cesare has no chance at all.
So I guess, Vanessa, would you buff Cesare to keep her at tier 6, or would you leave her the way she is and just move her?
Oh no, I would definitely have buffs in there. Like, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any buffs whatsoever. If you're gonna move it to tier 6, then you definitely need to adjust it accordingly.
And like I said, that was the problem that I had with the ship. Not that they were moving it to 6, it's that they were moving it to 6 without any changes. Well, as usual, we'll close out with our episode with listener questions of the week. First up, Skills to Win in the forums asks, or I think it's Skills to Win in the forums asks, do you guys think it's okay to continue uncompensated testing of the new meta on the live server? Recently, I was in a tier 9 battle against a tier 9 Russian battleship with a Unicum captain, and he destroyed my team. 4 kills and the top XP. I applaud solid red play. However, I started thinking my dilemma comes from how the game wants players to spend real money at tier 9 plus. The cost of running a tier 9 ship is high. Sometimes you can lose credits even on a win without a premium account. Clearly, that Unicum is content to rake in the winnings from a high damage, high kill games in a ship with questionable strengths. Is it fair to players who are grinding through, ignoring the currency losses across the red team for a moment? How about the player who placed second on the winning team? Is it fair to that captain who arguably could have earned more if a more balanced ship were on his team?
So I'm trying to understand this question in its entirety here. So there was a Soviet battleship being tested, and the question is about, is it fair that test ships are in there kind of upsetting the current meta? And because people are using signals, using consumables, using stuff that they're paying resources with, whether in-game or real life money, is that fair? Am I understanding that question?
I think it has more to do with like testing of ships on the live server that aren't completely balanced and how that's affecting the economy for other players.
Well, but isn't there tech line ships that are clearly, not well balanced that, we're kind of going through, and eventually they get nerfed, or some ships that are really underperforming get, balanced? I mean, that's, it's, I want to say it's a living, breathing game. It's always kind of changing. It's always, they're always trying to balance it, and it's always in a state of trying to understand, what is overperforming and what is underperforming, and trying to adjust and fine tune. I mean, that's the same with any game. I mean, look how long World of Warcraft has been trying to balance different classes with each other. It's kind of the same thing, I feel, with World of Warships.
I have worried about the same thing though that the question asker has worried about, and I don't think it's that big of a deal, because at least for the people on the side of the ship that's being tested, because often, it's not the one ship that's going to make a big difference in the result of the game. And even if it is, you still mostly get rewarded for your own play rather than what the team does, in which case, I don't think it takes much away if you are on the second guy on the team because the test ship got number 1. You'll still get your XP, you'll still get your credits. So I don't think there's much of a problem in that sense. But there could be if the ship is too weak, though, because then, it wouldn't perform quite enough. Now, if you're on the enemy team, though, to the test ship, then I can see quite a few problems, because if they're blatantly overpowered test ships, there's not much that can be done to mitigate that. And I don't know if we could do it in any other way either, though, because if the test ships aren't run on the live server, the data doesn't necessarily, it doesn't end up being all that useful. There are plenty of examples from other games where the test server results just are not representative at all to what the, general population ends up being at against that ship. So I think it's kind of necessary, though. So regardless whether it's fair or not, perhaps, the testers, when they find out that the ship is blatantly overpowered, maybe they could just play it less. But then again, maybe they just need to give the opponents more experience to play against them. So it's kind of difficult to say.
I guess I would say that I understand where the guy that's asking the question is coming from, and I have had some concerns about it. But the reason that I don't think it's a big deal is that the number of testers that are out there is pretty minuscule in terms of the total server population. So yes, you may run into a test ship now and then. You're much more likely not to run into a test ship, either on your team or on the opposite team. So in that sense, I really don't feel like it's statistically significant, even if it is unfair in an isolated instance.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that would, be Wargaming's, well, I shouldn't say that, but I have a feeling that that is kind of what Wargaming would say if they were to ever address that.
Alrighty, well, next question then. Forgotten Soldier 117 asks on the forums, I wanted to add an idea about how we could get BB-56 into the game. We already have 3 sort of similar American Tier 8 battleships in game, and it might be hard to add a 4th and still have it be unique. But what if we gave USS Washington the Jean Bart treatment and made it a Tier 9 coal ship? If a ship with only 8 15-inch guns can be made to work at Tier 9, then maybe with the right buffs, Washington could also work up-tiered. For example, what if the secondaries got Massachusetts buff and the ship was given a hydro to give it a brawling focus, or maybe a defensive fire consumable, or even Jean Bart's reload booster? 9 16-inch American guns firing the super heavy AP shell with a reload booster sounds pretty scary to me. Just like Vanessa, I would like to see USS Washington come into the game, and I would think bringing her into as a Tier 9 can open up some cool ways to make her unique and fun.
It's probably the most interesting. I haven't even thought about buffing it to Tier 9 or making it Tier 8.5, if you will, and adding some things like this. This is interesting. I mean, I was initially, when we were testing Massachusetts, it was like, this should be Washington. And, I know there's a lot of radar in the game, but it should have radar. I mean, these things, like, this should have been in the game like a long time ago, in my opinion. And there was an opportunity to kind of do that, like, just forever ago. You could have had it. One of the first ships in the game with radar. You could have given it the Massachusetts treatment, with the extended secondary range. And honestly, I think that maybe they need to buff the secondaries on most of the U.S. battleships and maybe buff the range a little bit. Not go as far as the Germans or the French, but maybe have it a kilometer or 2 less. Clearly just a little bit more. If you're trying to make these ships kind of a jack of all trades, then I feel the secondary range should be bumped up at least a kilometer or a kilometer and a half. But that being said, that's a really interesting idea that was proposed here. I never thought about maybe taking it to Tier 9 as a coal option, but without radar, I think that it would feel ahistorical. I don't know. But one thing for sure, it's a lot of people have tossed around the idea of, well, what about the prototype concept with the 14-inch guns? And to me, I think that would kind of be insulting to the ship and the history of the ship. I don't know about you two, but maybe if you did like what they're doing with West Virginia and having a 41 hull and a 44 hull, or however they're going to address that, maybe have like a Washington proto with 14s and then have the actual Washington configuration. But I don't know. I would be extremely upset. I've already voiced this to Wargaming, but I would be extremely upset if they chose like a 14-inch option prototype and not given it as 16-inch guns.
So all I'm hearing from you is that you want her to be tier 7 with really, really nerfed AP penetration, just like the Japanese ones?
Sure, Arun. Whatever floats your boat.
Well, jokes aside, I think it's a great idea, though. I think that the playstyle of this type of a ship could easily end up, like, if you take this class of ship, you could end up having her be at tier 8, tier 9, even tier 10, because they are different from, for example, the Montana, and I think she could fit those tiers of play just fine if you will make her more powerful, and I think it's a great idea.
I actually do too. I think I would rather see her with like a reload booster though, so than some of the other ideas. One question I did have, Vanessa, is you say you want radar on Washington, and I agree that makes total sense. Would you be okay with this Russian radar that on the battleships that we've been testing that only detects other battleships and carriers?
Yeah, I would. Maybe have it detect cruisers as well. But yes, I would be fine with that.
Alrighty. Well, last question of the day. Red Sea Bear asks on the forums, what's your favorite map and what's your least favorite map and why?
I'm terrible with map names. Um, but I don't know. I think Fault Line. I think it's Fault Line. It's one of the original. Like it's a map that's been around forever. I don't, I don't know. It's just the map is like been around forever. It's been. I don't think it's ever been changed. It's just. It seems like it's been a great map ever since the game has been in its testing stages, and I've always enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed North as well, though it's received a lot of changes. But Fault Line, I think Fault Line has to be my favorite. Just you've got the center where it's open and you could do some silly thing there, but there's that one little island that you can kind of run and duck to. You've got the far right hand side, or if you're looking at it from the bottom, I believe where the sea cap is, and you've got that little, that little channel, that little canal there, where there's always some type of interesting torpedo attack being lined up. And then on the far opposite side, you kind of have these islands that kind of open up to nothing, and you've got, long distance shooting back and forth as you're trying to well, we want to flank around here, but and it's a map with a little bit of everything that different parts of the map.
Fault line has been changed, but not significantly. Like, islands have been moved around, some islands have disappeared, some have been added, but it hasn't changed too significantly. The map mostly plays still the same way as it has for a very long time. I also thought of Fault line at first, but then I remembered that there's a map I loved more. Although there's actually kind of two answers to the question. One is where I would like to play ranked battles, and another one is where I like playing random battles. I think the best map in the game is New Dawn, because that map has the coolest features of any map, because it has almost everything. It has lots of islands that you can hide behind, but most of the islands are small enough that you can fire across them, meaning that those islands aren't necessarily going to be annoying where they block shots from you or your allies or even enemies if the ships aren't trying to actively hide behind them, which I think is really useful. It also has enough open space that destroyers with torpedoes and whatnot can play their game, and it has islands spread basically across the map. So there's islands where CVs can hide behind, and there's islands that you can hide behind when you are like in the thick of the battle. Like, you can use those islands to basically sneak closer and closer to the enemies, for example. And I think New Dawn is one of the best maps we have. I love playing ranked on that map. But I do have to say that the initial version of New Dawn was terrible because it was too tiny. The second answer to the question is that I like North as well. I even like the really old version of North, but I don't like it in ranked at all. Because what happens in ranked usually is that the big center island ends up like being in the middle of all of the fighting, because the caps are on both of the edges. And what ends up happening is that the radar cruiser on both sides parks next to the center island. Nobody can shoot her, and then they just basically cover all the cap zones, and that makes the life of all of the destroyers terrible. So my answer is New Dawn and perhaps North.
Some really interesting options. Honestly, one of my favorite maps in the game is Islands of Ice. And maybe not the version that we have right now, but several of the most recent versions. I love Islands of Ice. But you have to remember, I play heavy cruisers and battleships for the most part. So Islands of Ice gives me all kinds of options for setting on a flank and winning that flank with a battleship or a heavy cruiser. And it's the most comfortable for me to play in my battleships.
Kalorn, you're weird. I,
Hey, at least I didn't say Tears of the Player Base.
Well, I didn't answer what my least favorite was, and yeah, there's Tears of the Desert, but I was gonna say Islands of Ice as probably my least favorite.
In terms of least favorite map, I really don't like Sleeping Giant. That stupid ass ACAP that's completely enclosed drives me batshit crazy all the time.
Yeah, I can understand. I mean, obviously, Tears of the Desert is kind of on everyone's kind of top list of ugh. But yeah,
Oh, and don't forget Mountain Range. That
yeah,
stupid line of islands.
yeah, Mountain
Oh.
Range can be. Though I don't hate it as much, but yeah, that one is frustrating too.
I don't really have least favorite maps. Maybe Ocean, but that depends so much on the ship I'm playing. I think I would have less problems with Ocean if it were bigger, mostly because it's difficult to hide in a CV on that map, since the map is only 36 by 36 kilometers, and it gets tier 10 battles. What is this? Like, we have other maps that are 42 by 42, which are tier 4 to 7.
Yeah, but Arun, making that map bigger would be so difficult.
Yes, sure. I also heard that apparently Ocean isn't balanced. For some reason, one side seems to win more often.
I don't understand how that's possible. I literally don't get it. But it's true. You're right. They have data that says one side on Ocean wins more than the other side, and I'm like,
you see, in the past,
what?
The map has actually been changed. You see, in the past, they thought the reason why one side won more than the other was that the sun was on behind one side and not on the others, so it would basically.
I remember.
And the problem
that.
back then was that you didn't, like, when you zoom in to target the ship, the smoke didn't disappear. So smoke would be there, and when the sun was behind you, it would glare back at you from, the smoke screen, and you basically would have a really hard time seeing things. Whereas if you were on the other side, it would make a nice silhouette for you to fire it. They thought that was the problem, but apparently when they changed it, that didn't fix the issues. So I do wonder why.
It's gotta be psychological.
Yeah.
Like, it's gotta be.
I think this was mentioned during when we were at the event. I forgot the name. Yeah.
The CC
and
event.
I think the person talking about it was like, it probably has to do something with the fact that the map ends up mostly being played in a clockwise fashion, but they're not sure because all of the
yeah, no, you're
all
right.
of the spawns are
like
identically far away from all of the stuff, and I find it really fascinating as well. But Ocean, I just don't like it because it's not good for CVs or any ship that tries to sit far away so that they can either heal or basically disengage for a while and then engage again. And the other problem is that you don't have any islands to try to sneak closer. You'll be constantly fired upon when you try doing that. And it's a nightmare for cruisers. I don't really actually mind tiers of the cruisers that much because nowadays, with the map being rotated 90 degrees, it's not that bad because often what ends up happening is that you get kind of a mountain range situation, except you have 3 sections here where you have two of the island chains, like the middle island. When you think of the middle island chain in mountain range, except you have 3 of them, or 2 of them, sorry, and this makes 3 sections of the map. So you have the one side, middle, and the other side, and these are basically each of the capstones. And often what ends up happening is that one of the sides or sections of the battle ends up not being that hot, or there aren't many enemies there, in which case you can use those islands to try to go closer or maybe flank the enemies, and I think that makes for some interesting gameplay. Although I do wish the islands weren't quite as tall, so it would be possible to shoot over some of them at least.
I don't know. I never have good outcome of games on Tears of the Desert. It's just even if I perform well, just the overall gameplay, the team play, whether it's my team or the opposing team, it's not good. I never have matches on that map and go, oh wow, that was a really fun, enjoyable map or match.
Well, I wanted to thank you guys for submitting your questions this week for us to answer. Please submit more for upcoming weeks so that we can answer your questions on the podcast. I also wanted to give a quick shout out and thanks to all the people that came to USS Texas this last weekend. There were somewhere between 300 and 500 people that were on Battleship Texas with all of us down in Houston, and we had a absolutely phenomenal time. I handed out all of my stickers, so I hope that you guys, if you were able to make it, that you got a sticker from me as podcast listeners. I did run into a bunch of people that say they listen to the podcast on a regular basis, so that was very, very awesome. Did you guys have anything that you wanted to throw in before we close it out today?
Nope, not really.
No.
Alrighty. Well, that's it for this week, folks. We have a new spot on the NA forums for just the Warships podcast. Be sure to check that out for news and posts. Check for the link in the description. That is where we have our post, one of the places that you can put a questions of the week for us to answer. As always, follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Warships podcast and Twitter at Warships podcast for update between episodes. Don't forget to check out Arun on YouTube and Twitch as well. We, of course, want to thank our amazing Patreon backers. If you're interested in supporting us, please consider becoming a backer yourself. Backers are what makes the podcast possible, and we couldn't do it without you guys. And you get first call on your questions being answered here on the Question of the Week. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.